In the bustling city of Lagos, where the struggle for survival often overshadows kindness, a hungry young woman named Margaret knelt down to help an old man whom everyone else had overlooked. Despite her own hunger, she offered her last piece of food to this frail old man. Little did she know that he was the father of the cold-hearted boss who would soon turn her life upside down. However, it was this small act of compassion that would eventually lead to a surprising twist of fate, unveiling a deeper truth that would change everything. If you're joining us for the first time, please take a moment to subscribe so you can explore more amazing stories with us. The sun was starting to rise over the hazy skyline of Lagos when Margaret tied her old scarf around her head and stepped into the narrow hallway she shared with 3 other families. The air was thick with the smell of dust and fuel. Her younger brother, Victor, still sleepy, grumbled, "Sister, are you going out already?" She smiled and tucked a folded 500 note under his pillow. "This is for your transport, Victor. Don't skip school again, okay?" he mumbled. "Yes, Ma," and rolled over. Margaret glanced at him for a moment. He was her only family since their parents passed away 2 years ago, and whispered a quick prayer before stepping outside. Margaret worked at a company called Crestmark Foods, where they packed processed bags of rice for sale. Though the pay was low and the job was tough, she was thankful for it. Her job helped pay for her younger brother's education and made it easier for them to manage their monthly rent. The yellow Danfo Lagos buses were already packed with sleepy passengers, their bodies crushed together. The driver's assistant shouted, "The bus destination." Margaret squeezed into the bus, holding tightly to her small nylon bag, which contained 2 pieces of sliced buttered bread wrapped in tissue, a tea flask, and a water bottle. Her stomach rumbled, but she smiled to herself, saying, "Later." At the junction, the traffic was a mess. Street vendors shouted at each other, trying to sell their goods. Under a mango tree sat an old man on a worn mat. His clothes were faded, his sandals broken, and his gaze seemed distant, like he was waiting for a miracle that never came. "Good morning, sir," Margaret said gently. He looked up slowly. "Morning, my child. I am fine," he said, though his lips shook. Margaret hesitated, then pulled out the bread from her bag and offered it to him. "Please, eat this." His eyes widened in confusion. "For me?" "Yes," she replied with a smile. "You need it more than I do." He accepted the bread with trembling hands. Laughter erupted from nearby pedestrians. "Look, a fine girl feeding the old man," one teased, while another joked, "Why not give him your number? He might bless you." Margaret ignored them. She knelt beside the old man, wiped his hands with a tissue, and helped him eat slowly. "What's your name?" he asked after swallowing. "Margaret," she answered. He nodded, a faint smile on his face. "A good name. I'm Thomas Sawyer." She helped him sip water from a small bottle. "Please rest, sir. I'll come back tomorrow." "You've already shown kindness, my daughter," he murmured. At Crestmark Foods, Margaret arrived 20 minutes late. The factory was bustling with activity. "Late again?" Mr. Lawson barked. "The bus broke down, sir." "Always excuses. Go to line 3. Rebecca, one of her co-workers, leaned over to Susan and smirked. She was begging at the bus stop again. "Always the drama." Susan shrugged. "Maybe she wants sympathy." Margaret ignored their comments and focused on her work, her sweat running down her neck as she packed rice bags faster than anyone else. By the end of the day, dark clouds had gathered. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Still, she hurried back to the mango tree, half of her lunch in hand. The old man was still there, coughing. "Please, sir, take this," she said, pressing the package into his hand. He looked at her, his eyes shining. "You are a rare one," he whispered. "While the world takes, you give." Margaret smiled weakly. "Maybe giving helps me forget what I've lost." Thomas coughed again, covering his mouth. "Kindness is a seed, my daughter. Plant it even when the ground seems dry." That night, lightning flashed across the Lagos sky as Margaret whispered into the dark, "God, if kindness is a seed, please let it grow." Outside, rain poured down, and beneath the mango tree, the kindness she shared began to take root in ways she could never have imagined. Tomorrow, kindness will face cruelty, and the real challenge will begin. Philip Sawyer's black SUV zipped through the rainy streets outside Crestmark Foods, making a splash as if cutting through stillness. In Lagos, traffic didn't care who you were, but those with power always seemed to get through. Philip had a stern, unreadable face that made people sit a little straighter when they spoke to him. Inside his office, he studied company reports with a sharp focus. Too many late employees. Too many excuses. We need to get stricter, he said in a flat tone. Mrs. Johnson, the HR manager, tried to explain. Sir, Lagos traffic can be really tough on buses. People. He cut her off angrily. People find time to gossip, but not to be on time. If we say 8 o'clock, then it's 8 o'clock. Yes, sir, she replied, adjusting her glasses nervously. Later that morning, as Philip walked through the factory, the workers stood up straight like soldiers. His cologne mixed with the strong smell of rice dust and sweat in the air. At one assembly line, Margaret was busy tying a sack, her hands quick but shaking. She didn't realize he was there until it became silent around her. Philip glanced at the clock. You started work at 8:17. She looked up, startled. Sir, the bus. Save your excuses. If you're late again, you're fired. His voice was cold. He turned and walked away, leaving whispers in his wake. Rebecca smirked at Susan. See? I told you he doesn't like her. He prefers women who arrive before sunrise. Susan frowned. You really talk too much. Rebecca rolled her eyes. At least I'm speaking the truth. During lunch, Margaret sat quietly by the window, eating part of her meal and saving the rest for Thomas, the old man she cared for. The others around her chatted about their salaries and hairstyles. She packed her small flask carefully and hurried out before the bell rang. When she reached the mango tree where Thomas usually sat, he looked worse than before. His coughs were harsh and deep. You again, he said between breaths. Yes, sir, she replied gently, smiling. You didn't eat yesterday, right? He nodded slightly. She opened her flask and fanned him softly as she fed him. You shouldn't give everything away, he whispered. My mother used to say, if you have 2 spoons of rice, share one. Your stomach won't collapse, she replied with a small smile. He chuckled weakly. Wise woman. I lost her when I was 16, Margaret shared quietly. And my father, a year later, but I still have my brother. That's why I work hard. Across the street, a driver in a black SUV stopped momentarily, watching. His eyes widened as he recognized the old man's frail figure. He froze, gripping the steering wheel. It can't be, he murmured, his voice shaking. But he didn't get out. He just drove off quickly before anyone could catch him. Back in his office, Philip stood by the window, thinking about the girl he had just reprimanded. There was something about her calm, kind face that unsettled him. He poured himself a glass of water and muttered, People pretend, always. Then he closed the blinds. The next morning, Margaret arrived early but found that Thomas was missing. Her heart raced. Where's the old man who sits here? She asked a fruit seller. The woman waved her hand. He fainted this morning. Some boys took him to the small clinic near the bus stop. Margaret didn't hesitate. She took off running, the world blurring around her. At the clinic, the nurse frowned at the crumpled money Margaret handed her. This isn't enough for treatment. Please do something to help him, Margaret pleaded. I'll find more money. The nurse sighed, took the money and nodded. We'll do what we can. Margaret pressed her hands together, whispering, Thank you. As she sat beside Thomas's bed in the tiny clinic room, she had no idea that her act of kindness was about to change her life forever and reveal a family secret hidden in silence. A kind heart can break rules, but soon those rules will strike back even harder. The rain had stopped by morning, but Lagos was buzzing with rumors. Inside Crestmark Foods, the sounds of machines mixed with whispers that spread faster than the truth. By lunchtime, a different kind of storm was brewing inside the company. Mr. Lawson, sir, a junior clerk shouted, rushing across the floor. There's a problem. The petty cash is missing from your drawer. Lawson's expression darkened. Missing? How much is gone? About 50,000 naira, sir. He slammed his hand onto the table. No one leaves this floor until I find out what happened. Everyone stopped in their tracks. Rebecca shared a quick glance with Susan. This is it, she whispered, a sly smile on her face. Watch how this unfolds. When the supervisor ordered everyone to step aside for a search, Rebecca quietly slipped down the corridor. Her heels hardly made a sound because she had planned everything perfectly. The security cameras often flickered in this area, and she knew exactly where the blind spots were. Moving like someone who had done this before, she approached locker E17. Crouching down, she pulled a folded cloth from her bag. Inside were naira notes. She carefully placed them in the corner of the locker, snapped a quick photo of the locker number, and smiled to herself. "Let's see who ends up in trouble now," she whispered before returning to join the crowd just as security arrived. "Open your lockers," Lawson commanded. One by one, the heavy locker doors clanged open until they reached E17. As soon as it swung open, some Naira notes fluttered out like trapped birds. Silence fell. Everyone stared. "What's that?" one worker asked, confused. "Money," another answered, astonished. Lawson bent down, picked up the notes, and turned toward Margaret. "Is this your locker?" Her eyes widened in shock. "Yes, sir, but Save it, you're coming with me," he interrupted. The atmosphere buzzed with tension. Susan covered her mouth in disbelief. Rebecca crossed her arms, pretending to be shocked. "Oh no, I can't believe this," she said loud enough for her colleagues to hear. Inside the HR office, the air felt cold and heavy with judgment. Mrs. Johnson glanced at the money, then at Margaret. "You know how serious this is, right?" "Yes, ma'am," Margaret replied, her voice trembling yet steady. "But I didn't take that money. Then how did it end up in your locker?" "I don't know," she said softly. "Someone must have placed it there." Before Mrs. Johnson could reply, the door swung open. Philip Sawyer entered, his sleeves rolled up, his expression as hard as steel. He glanced from Margaret to the money and back. "We have rules," he said quietly, which somehow sounded worse than shouting. "If you're lying, you should leave now before I call the police." "I won't leave," she said, raising her chin defiantly, "because I didn't steal." Philip's gaze lingered on her for a moment. He seemed to hesitate, but then it was gone. "Suspend her for 1 week," he ordered. "We'll review the camera footage." He turned and left without looking back. Outside, people watched as Margaret walked by. Some shook their heads, others whispered, and a few laughed. "I told you that girl was pretending," one woman hissed. "All that fake kindness." Margaret remained silent, moving like someone carrying invisible weights, heavy but still determined to move forward. At the clinic, the nurse met her at the door. "He's stable," she said softly. Margaret entered to find Thomas lying weakly on the bed, but his eyes sparkled when he saw her. "They said I stole," she murmured, sitting beside him. "I lost my job, maybe for good." Thomas reached for her hand. "Truth walks slowly, but it never gets lost," he said. "Just keep moving forward." That night, the rain returned. In his apartment, Philip sat in front of his laptop, watching grainy footage of the area by the lockers. There was a blurry shape, Rebecca's silhouette, lingering by E17 just before lunch. He frowned. "Zoom in," he instructed IT over the phone, "and get me the hallway camera footage." Meanwhile, across town, Margaret washed a borrowed bowl at the clinic's tap. She didn't notice the footsteps behind her until a calm voice said, "Why do you help him? He's not your family." She turned and froze. It was Philip, standing under the dim light, his shirt damp from the rain. "Because someone should," she replied quietly, "and because one day I might need someone too." Philip studied her for a moment. His mouth tightened, but he didn't say anything more. Then he stepped back out into the rain. "Tomorrow, the lights will go out, and the truth will shine brighter than anyone expects." The clinic was suddenly plunged into darkness, leaving only the sounds of nurses in distress and Thomas Sawyer's worsening cough echoing in the air. "Get the generator," someone yelled from down the hall. Margaret didn't wait for anyone to help. She felt her way through the dark until her fingers brushed against the blanket covering Thomas. His breathing was weak. He struggled to reach for his inhaler on the bedside table. "Inhaler," he gasped, barely able to speak. Margaret quickly searched the table, knocking over a small bottle in the process. Finally, she found the inhaler and held it to his mouth. "Breathe slowly," she instructed, her voice calm as she counted. 1, 2, good again. When the generator roared back to life, light returned to the room, bringing Margaret a sense of relief. Thomas's breathing became steadier. Their eyes met, and he smiled gently at her. "You should have been a nurse," he said softly. She smiled back, clearing sweat from his forehead with her scarf. "I'm just someone who cares about others." In the doorway, unnoticed, stood Philip, holding a flashlight. The beam lit up the room just in time to capture the tender moment between Margaret and Thomas. For a brief second, he was reminded of his own mother, who once cared for him like that when he was ill. Blinking back memories, he turned away before anyone noticed his expression. Outside, the rain hammered against his car as he gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Don't get carried away. Kindness doesn't prove innocence," he muttered to himself, but deep down he knew those words felt empty. The next morning, life in the city resumed its normal buzz. When Margaret returned to the clinic with some warm porridge, a nurse stopped her. "Someone paid for part of your bill last night," she announced. Margaret was taken aback. "What? Who did that?" The nurse smiled. "An anonymous donor. Just left the money in an envelope with no names." Margaret stared at the brown envelope in confusion, her hands shaking. "Why would someone do that for us?" The nurse shrugged. "Not everything is bad in the world." Inside the ward, Thomas was eating his porridge when he noticed her expression. "You look puzzled," he said. "Someone paid part of your bill," she explained. "But we don't know who." A knowing smile crossed his face. "Sometimes help comes without a name. Just thank the universe." Meanwhile, at Crestmark Foods, Philip was in his office reviewing security footage. A blurry figure caught his attention again. This time, he noticed something familiar: Rebecca's red bracelet on the screen. So it was her, he whispered to himself. He called in the IT, HR, and security teams. "We need to handle this quietly," he instructed. "No noise, no pity. I want every access log and photo checked. Keep this under wraps until I say otherwise." As investigations began, Rebecca's laughter filled the canteen. She was sitting with Susan and flaunting her new wig. "Can you believe she's still playing innocent?" she mocked. Susan frowned. "Maybe she is innocent, Rebecca." "Wake up! Life doesn't reward those who cry for pity," Rebecca scoffed back. During lunchtime, Margaret quietly walked through the canteen with her flask, but two women blocked her path. "Actress." One of them sneered. "Cry smaller so we can clap." Margaret lowered her head and carefully walked around them, feeling their laughter sting her like thorns. She refused to look back. At that same moment, a driver from a black SUV stood at the clinic gate under a silver umbrella. He observed the building for a while, sighed, and then entered briefly. He spoke quietly to a nurse, handing her another envelope. "Tell her," he said softly, "some kindness shouldn't go unnoticed." As he stepped back out into the rain, he paused by a mango tree, gazing at the damp ground. "Madam," he whispered to no one in particular, "your seed is growing." Inside the clinic, Margaret looked at Thomas and smiled faintly. "You're getting better," she said. He nodded slowly. "Because the winds are changing." She narrowed her eyes, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Thomas smiled enigmatically. "You will see soon, my dear, you will see." Outside, thunder rumbled over Lagos, but this time, it felt like the drums of something significant. The sound of fate drawing nearer. By the following day, truth would arrive at Crestmark Foods with a new determination. And it wouldn't knock before stepping in. By noon the next day, an unusual quiet filled the air at Crestmark Foods. The machines still whirred, but the chatter was subdued and a sense of unease hung over the workers. Everyone had heard rumors of a special meeting, but no one knew the purpose. Even Rebecca, usually the loudest voice in the room, had applied her lipstick twice that morning and appeared both confident and anxious. At exactly 12, Philip Sawyer entered the hall, his footsteps echoing like a judge's gavel. Following him were Mrs. Johnson with a tablet and the head of IT carrying a laptop. Security personnel stood at both doors, and the atmosphere was tense. Philip adjusted his cuffs and proclaimed, "We're here to get clarity. There will be no shouting or gossip, only facts." He motioned to the technician, and the projector flickered on. The first slide showed footage from a hallway camera, focusing on the staff lockers. Workers leaned in closer, whispering, "That's Rebecca's hair." The image zoomed in, revealing a figure with a red bracelet and a suspicious posture near locker E17. The next frame showed James, the security guard, clutching the master keys longer than usual and glancing around nervously. Rebecca's confident demeanor suddenly faltered. "Anyone can edit videos," she retorted sharply, but her usual bravado was noticeably absent. Ignoring her protest, Philip proceeded. "This footage is backed up by our Wi-Fi access logs. Someone made a fake account to post private photos of a colleague named Margaret, and that account originated from a device connected to our network during lunch hours. That device connects back to you, Miss Rebecca." The crowd gasped collectively. Susan covered her mouth in shock, and Mr. Lawson turned pale. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her voice calm. "We also have written statements from 2 cleaners who saw Rebecca near the lockers at lunchtime, and a vendor outside the clinic who witnessed her taking pictures of Margaret while pretending to text." Rebecca's expression twisted in anger. "This is a setup. That old beggar probably told them to say that." Philip's voice cut through the commotion. "Enough." He paused and gestured toward the door. A security guard returned, pushing a wheelchair. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. The man sitting in the chair was the same frail old figure they had seen near the mango tree, now dressed neatly, his eyes bright and assertive. Margaret followed closely behind, puzzled as to why she was included. Thomas Sawyer raised a shaky hand for silence. His voice, though thin, carried a profound weight. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began softly. "I've spent weeks sitting under your mango tree, watching you all. Many walked by, few noticed. But one girl stopped, shared her food with me, and called me sir." A hush fell over the room. Every whisper faded. "I concealed my identity," Thomas continued. "Not for pity, but for proof. I wanted to see if kindness still existed without any applause. I found it." His gaze shifted to Margaret, whose eyes filled with confusion and fear. "This girl gave me her last meal when she had nothing." He turned to his son, Philip, whose expression had gone from a tough facade to one of turmoil. "And you," Thomas said, his voice shaking, "have always relied on numbers rather than compassion. Open your eyes, Philip. The truth you seek isn't in data, it's in her." Philip's mouth fell open, but no words came. The room seemed to spin as he stared at his father, disbelief washing over him. You were alive all this time?" he whispered. Thomas smiled faintly. "Alive enough to see the world you've built." Gasps spread like wildfire among the workers. They exchanged glances. Rebecca slowly stepped back, eyes wide with shock. Susan wept softly. Margaret, pale and bewildered, gripped the wheelchair's handle and whispered, "Sir, you're his father?" Thomas nodded gently. "Yes, dear, I'm the same man you showed kindness to." Rebecca's voice trembled as she protested. "You can't just believe her over me. She's acting." Philip turned to her with unwavering authority. "No, you're done pretending. When the truth finally comes to light, the guilty don't need handcuffs, only silence." The room was silent, filled with disbelief. No one dared to speak too loudly, as all eyes were fixed on the frail old man in the wheelchair, the very man who used to sit unnoticed under the mango tree. Thomas Sawyer had just exposed the harsh truth about the company's treatment of its employees. Philip swallowed hard, his mind racing. His father, the man he thought was long gone, had been right there the whole time, dressed in rags, watching him from the street like a ghost. He stepped forward, his voice trembling. You were out there all this time, watching me?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I saw the world you live in. I saw how your company treats people when no one's watching." Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "He's the owner's father." And suddenly, everyone realized the connection. Philip turned to the crowd. "Meeting adjourned," he said coldly, but his father raised a shaky hand. "No, son, not yet. Let them hear this." He looked over the workers, some embarrassed, some shocked. "This young woman gave me her last meal. Not because she knew me, and not because she expected anything in return, but because she still believed in kindness even when the world showed her none." He turned his gaze toward Margaret, who stood frozen beside him, her heart racing. "Daughter," he said softly, "you showed more honor with that one piece of bread than many do with their riches." Margaret's throat tightened. "Sir, I didn't know who you were. I just—" He smiled faintly. "That's why it mattered." The silence in the room was thick and heavy. Rebecca suddenly shouted, "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like she's a saint. What proof do you have that I did anything wrong? Those videos could mean anything." Philip turned sharply. "Enough." His voice boomed like thunder. "You will speak when you're asked to. Security, escort her out." Two guards stepped forward. Rebecca tried to resist, her voice quivering. "You're making a mistake, sir. You'll regret trusting her." Philip ignored her. "Mrs. Johnson," he said calmly, "please read the disciplinary actions." Mrs. Johnson opened her folder and spoke clearly. "Effective immediately, Miss Rebecca and Mr. James are suspended without pay while we investigate for misconduct, defamation, and misuse of company resources. Mr. Lawson is also suspended for negligence and unprofessional behavior." Rebecca's jaw dropped. "Suspended? Because of her?" She pointed at Margaret, panicking. "This is her witchcraft." A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd, but Philip silenced it with a single sharp look. "No one here is laughing today. This isn't a joke. This is about correcting wrongs." Susan, shaking, stepped slowly toward Margaret. Her voice was small but sincere. "I'm sorry. I was weak. I followed her lies." Margaret blinked through tears. "I forgive you," she whispered. Thomas smiled, pride shining through his wrinkles. "That's what true power looks like," he said softly. Philip scanned the room, his tone steady but heavy. Listen closely. I built this company believing rules were everything. But today, I learned rules don't mean anything without conscience. You may fear your boss, but from now on, I want you to respect each other more than you fear me. Heads bowed in silence. Even the biggest gossipers were quiet now. After the meeting, Philip turned to his father. You embarrassed me, father. Thomas smiled gently. No, son, I revealed who you truly are. There's a difference. Philip's chest rose and fell. I thought I was making you proud. You were making yourself cold, Thomas replied quietly. Now maybe you'll learn to care again. Later that evening, the factory was still. Workers clustered in small groups talking about what had just happened. Margaret sat alone outside near the mango tree, tears flowing freely at last. She wasn't sure if they were from relief, fear, or exhaustion. Philip found her there. His voice was softer now. You don't have to cry anymore. She stood up quickly, startled. Sir. Philip, he corrected. Not sir tonight. She hesitated. Why are you here? He sighed. Because I was wrong. He handed her a sealed envelope. This is your reinstatement, with full pay and an extra allowance. I also wrote you a note of commendation. Her hands shook as she took it. Thank you, sir. I mean, Philip. He smiled faintly. You earned it. Twice. From the shadows, Thomas watched them both and felt a wave of satisfaction washing over him. Good, he murmured. Let truth finish what kindness started. The lies had fallen away, but the hardest challenge of all was just beginning. Forgiveness. A week went by, and everything felt different at Crestmark Foods. The laughter in the halls was softer, no longer filled with cruelty. The teasing had stopped, and people greeted each other more carefully, as if they were aware that the walls could hear and feel. Philip's leadership style changed overnight. He was still strict and always on time, but his voice now had a new tone. Patience. For the first time in years, he started asking people, "How are you?" and genuinely listened to their answers. Workers began to say that their new manager had found his empathy again. Margaret returned to her familiar workstation, the same assembly line where her journey began. As she packed rice bags, her coworker Susan approached her with 2 cups of tea. I brought you one, she said shyly. Margaret smiled, a little surprised. You really don't have to. I want to, Susan replied, her voice shaky. You forgave me when I wouldn't have forgiven myself. Margaret took the cup. Let's start fresh then. They enjoyed their tea in comfortable silence, surrounded by the sounds of new beginnings in the factory. That afternoon, a new notice went up on the board. 0 tolerance for harassment and false accusations. Underneath, Philip had boldly written, If you mock the weak, you mock our company. Some workers were skeptical, but many nodded in agreement. Change often starts quietly before it grows louder. Meanwhile, across town, Thomas Sawyer sat by a clinic window, watching children play outside. His nurse smiled at him. You seem stronger today, Papa Thomas. He chuckled. Strength comes back when the heart finds peace. Later that day, Philip picked him up. For the first time in years, father and son sat together in the car, and the silence felt heavy but no longer unfriendly. You could have come home earlier, Philip said softly. I could have, Thomas agreed, but then you wouldn't have figured out who you really are. Philip sighed. Maybe I was too tough. Thomas smiled gently. Hard soil protects seeds, son, but if it never becomes soft, nothing will grow. That evening, Margaret and her younger brother Victor moved into a small, tidy apartment. The landlord, who used to bang on their door for rent, now stood awkwardly at the gate holding a bag of rice. Just a little thank you, he muttered. Margaret smiled kindly. Thank you, sir. When he left, Victor whispered, He's scared of you now. Margaret laughed. No, Victor, he's learning to respect us. At work, Rebecca's suspension became a story many shared. Some said she'd tried to find another job, but nobody wanted to hire her after what happened. Others said she'd left Lagos completely. Margaret didn't pry. She just hoped Rebecca would eventually learn what she had, that being cruel is heavy, and it always comes back to the person who spreads it. However, not everyone was ready for peace. Late one evening, Susan showed Margaret a message she received. A fake post on social media calling Margaret the company actress again, created by an unknown account. She's back, Susan whispered nervously. Margaret's expression hardened. Then we keep doing good, she replied firmly. The truth will stand. The next morning, Philip noticed the post as well. His jaw tensed, but instead of feeling angry, he found a sense of calm determination. We'll deal with this properly, he told HR. No yelling or seeking revenge, just the facts. Later that day, as the work shift ended, Margaret walked past the mango tree outside the company gate. The evening breeze brought the scent of roasted corn and dust. She paused, smiling faintly as she remembered how it all started, with acts of kindness. Unbeknownst to her, a black car was parked nearby. Inside, Rebecca watched, her face unreadable and her fingers gripping her phone. "You won today," she whispered, "but this is not the end of the story. Every seed has thorns around it, and sometimes they grow faster than the flowers." The rainy season in Lagos often has a way of cleansing both the streets and people's spirits. After a scandal had finally settled down, the city seemed to breathe more easily, although not everyone felt relaxed. In the quiet corners of Crestmark Foods, rumors still floated around like the scent of an old perfume. They said Rebecca was gone. They said she was planning something. They whispered many things, all of it troubling. Philip sat in his office late into the night, staring at his computer screen. It displayed the company's security activity, dates, locations, and all the hidden details of deceit. Determined to put an end to the turmoil, he muttered, "No more trouble." He called the head of the IT department. "Track down the fake account that shared those new messages," he commanded. "Don't just look for the device, find the person behind it." Meanwhile, across the factory, Margaret was gathering her belongings after a late shift. The night guard smiled as she walked by. "Good night, madam," he said. She blushed, replying, "Please don't call me that. I'm not a madam." He chuckled. "You're the reason this place still shines. Madam fits you." As she stepped outside, the streets shimmered with puddles. She walked home under a small umbrella, her heart heavy with unspoken gratitude. At her new apartment, Victor was waiting with homework spread out on the table. "You look tired," he said, noticing her weariness. "I'm fine, just a long day," she replied with a smile. He hesitated before asking, "Is that man, your boss, still helping?" Margaret paused, thinking about Philip. "He's trying to make things right, not for me, but for everyone." Victor smirked. You talk about him too much." Playfully, she threw a pillow at him. "Go to bed already." Meanwhile, in a small cafe nearby, Rebecca scrolled through her phone with trembling hands. She had created yet another fake account, her pride stopping her from letting go. "They took my job and my name," she hissed quietly, "but I will take their peace." A waiter placed a glass of water in front of her, but she didn't touch it. Anger and loneliness burned in her eyes. Back at the office, Philip received an update from the IT team. They had traced the false posts, once again, to a public Wi-Fi spot near Yaba, using a familiar username, Rebecca_B. He exhaled slowly. "She's not finished yet," he thought. But neither are we. This time he didn't call the police. Instead, he decided to write a message himself and post it on the company's bulletin board the following morning. Rumors are like smoke. They fade away. But truth is like fire. It keeps burning. Employees gathered around the board. Some smiled knowingly, while others simply nodded in agreement. Later that day, Philip visited his father, Thomas, at the clinic. His dad appeared stronger, with clearer eyes. "How's work?" Thomas asked. "Better," Philip replied, "but the past doesn't let go easily." Thomas chuckled. "The past isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. The problem arises when you refuse to learn from it." Philip smiled faintly. "You always speak in riddles." "Life is a riddle," Thomas said, "and kindness is usually the answer." When Margaret arrived with soup and fruits, Thomas's face lit up. "Ah, my daughter, you came." "I promised," she replied, setting the basket down. "You need to eat to get stronger." Thomas nodded approvingly. "See why I said she's special, Philip? Some talk about care. She actually does it." Philip looked at her with a softer expression. "You've done enough for everyone else, Margaret. When do you take care of yourself?" She smiled gently. "Taking care of others is how I breathe." The old man chuckled. "Be careful, my dear. Even strong hearts need rest." As the night wore on, Philip drove her home. Rain began to fall steadily. At a red light, he glanced at her reflection in the window. "You changed me," he said quietly. She looked surprised. "Me?" "Yes, you reminded me that rules mean nothing without people. You made me feel again." She blushed but stayed quiet. When they reached her apartment, she said softly, "Change doesn't make you weak, Philip. It makes you human." He smiled, and for the first time in years, his smile reached his eyes. However, as they drove away, a flash from a camera blinked from the corner of the street. Someone hiding in the rain, taking pictures through a window. Rebecca watched the car's taillights vanish and whispered, "Let's see how the world reacts when your kindness faces scandal." Kindness had healed wounds, but now envy was sharpening its knives again. Morning sunlight poured over Lagos, refreshing the city like a soothing embrace after a storm. The rain from the night before had cleaned the streets, leaving behind glistening puddles that sparkled in the light. At Crestmark Foods, the machines hummed with a lightness that felt almost like music. Life appeared to be moving forward, or so it seemed. Inside her small office cubicle, Margaret was busy signing off on delivery reports when Susan burst in, breathless. "You need to see this," she whispered, handing Margaret a folded piece of paper. Margaret frowned and unfolded it, revealing a screenshot, a photo of her and Philip sitting in his car outside her house, taken the night before. The caption read, "Factory girl charms her boss, promotion through pity." Margaret's heart sank. "Who posted this?" she asked. "Anonymous," Susan replied quietly. "But you know who it is." Margaret's hands shook as the gossip spread quickly. Phones buzzed, heads turned, and within an hour, the photo had reached half the staff. Philip found out before lunch. He stormed into the HR office, his face dark with anger. "Who's behind this?" he demanded. Mrs. Johnson looked overwhelmed. "We're still tracing the source, sir, but it looks familiar." Philip slammed his hand on the desk. "Rebecca," he said with certainty. That evening, he drove to Yaba with his security chief. The cafe's neon sign flickered as they entered. Rebecca sat in the corner, surprised to see him. "Philip," she said, attempting a smile. He didn't respond. "You've gone too far," he said, his tone serious. She laughed weakly. "What? You can't prove anything." He placed a folder on the table. "Screenshots, traces of where it came from, CCTV footage. Don't underestimate your own intelligence." Her laughter faded. "So what now? You'll send the police to my mother's house? Arrest me for gossip?" "No," he replied calmly. "I'll do something worse." He leaned closer. "I'll forgive you." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "What? Because you're not worth my anger anymore," he said, standing up. "But know this, you will never work for my company again. Ever." As he turned to leave, with bitterness in her voice, she said, "You think that girl loves you for real? Just wait until she sees what you're really like when nobody's watching." Philip didn't respond. Outside, the rain started again, gentle but persistent, as if the city wanted to wash away every rumor. Back at the factory, Margaret sat alone in the break room, scrolling through hurtful comments online. Her eyes stung with tears. She didn't notice Philip enter quietly. "Don't read that," he said softly. "They're calling me terrible names," she whispered. "Liar, manipulator, homewrecker." He took her phone and set it aside, then sat opposite her. "People who can't shine always throw stones at those who do, but stones can't stop the sunrise." She blinked away tears. "You shouldn't have to protect me." "Maybe not," he replied gently, "but I want to." A week later, the company held a small appreciation ceremony. The staff gathered, not just for formality, but to mend relationships. Thomas Sawyer arrived, dressed in a crisp traditional outfit, walking slowly but with pride. The workers greeted him with respect now. He was no longer the man they once ridiculed by the mango tree. When Philip handed Margaret her promotion certificate, applause filled the room. She fought back tears as she spoke. "Thank you for believing that the truth matters more than the noise." After the event, the three of them, Philip, Thomas, and Margaret, walked out together. The evening sun was golden, and the mango tree swayed gently in the breeze. Thomas stopped and sat on a bench beneath it. "This is where it all began," he said, smiling at Margaret. "Under this tree, you fed a stranger. That act grew into a family." Margaret chuckled softly. "I almost didn't stop that day because I was late for work." "And if you hadn't," Thomas said, "we'd all still be strangers." Philip knelt before them, the gravel digging into his knee. "Margaret," he said, his voice slightly shaky, "you've seen me at my worst. You saw my father when I didn't want to. I don't want our story to end with titles or promotions." He pulled a small silver ring from his pocket. "Will you walk with me, through whatever storms come next?" Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Yes." Victor, watching from the gate, yelled, "Say it louder, sister!" Laughter erupted around them. Margaret looked up at the sky, her heart full. The mango leaves rustled gently overhead, as if blessing their moment. They had overcome lies and challenges, but destiny had one last promise to keep. Beneath the same mango tree, where everything began. The wedding wasn't the biggest celebration Lagos had ever seen, but it felt as if the entire city paused for a moment to enjoy it. The church glowed warmly as musicians outside tested their drums, while caterers worked hard in the courtyard, dealing with steam and the spicy aroma of food. Inside, gold and white ribbons decorated the pews, and a group of little flower girls practiced their steps, looking serious but giggling when they accidentally dropped flower petals that stuck to their shoes. Thomas Sawyer arrived early, using a polished cane to help him walk, dressed in a traditional outfit that looked like fresh palm fruit. People greeted him with quiet respect, not just because of his name, but because of the story that seemed to follow him everywhere. He settled into a front row seat, his eyes shining with emotion. A nurse from the clinic came in and waved shyly, while the man from the local shop who had once seen Rebecca taking pictures sat proudly. Even the bus conductor who used to tease Margaret stood at the back, humbled by recent events. At the altar, Philip wore a fitted charcoal suit, taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. Mrs. Johnson whispered to him as she passed, "Remember, no fainting today." He chuckled quietly, shaking his head. The old Philip would have laughed off such comments, but the new Philip understood that these little jokes helped keep things light. When the choir began to sing a gentle hymn, the doors swung open, and everyone in the church collectively took a deep breath. Margaret walked in on Victor's arm, her veil flowing like morning mist. Victor tried to maintain a serious expression, but tears brightened his eyes. "Don't cry," she whispered. "You'll ruin my makeup." He nodded vigorously, ready to be brave. As they walked, people stood up, some wiping away tears, others smiling widely. She was not just a bride. She symbolized that kindness can change lives, like a small river shaping a path through rocky terrain. Philip stepped forward and took Margaret's hands. The pastor's voice became soft and warm, sharing wise words about love. It is patient, it is kind. When it was time for their vows, Philip's voice wavered at first, but then grew stronger. "I once thought love made you weak, and kindness was just a trick," he said. "But you've shown me that rules without compassion trap people, and power without honesty can hurt. I promise to protect your name the way you have protected the dignity of others." Then it was Margaret's turn. She spoke simply, just as she always did. "I promise to stand with you in truth, even when it's hard. I promise to share my food, share my courage, and remind you to stay human, not just strong." Thomas dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, letting the tears fall. They exchanged rings, simple circles filled with so much meaning, and when their kiss sealed the vows, the drums outside erupted with joyous sounds. The reception soon spilled out into the evening. Plates clinked together, jollof rice sparkled, and the smoky smell of grilled meat filled the air. Susan hugged Margaret tightly and whispered, "You taught me to be brave." Mr. Lawson approached slowly, looking ashamed. "I failed you," he admitted. Margaret touched his arm gently. "The story isn't over, sir. You can do better from here." He nodded, looking relieved. Later, Thomas was invited to give a brief speech, and the room went quiet. He spoke softly, and everyone leaned in to hear. "I once sat beneath a mango tree to see what this city was about," he began. "There, I found a daughter who shared her last piece of bread with me, and a son who learned to see the world in a new way." His eyes sparkled with joy. "Lagos, remember this. Laughing at those in need is easy, but showing compassion is truly valuable, and worth every naira." As the music softened and the lights dimmed, the three of them quietly slipped away to the mango tree. Its branches swayed gently, as if welcoming an old friend. "This is where it all began," Margaret said, "with a small act of kindness to a hungry man." Thomas tapped his cane thoughtfully. "Small acts of kindness," he said, "are how great cities remember their hearts." Laughter echoed in the distance. The night carried the scent of rain that might come or might not. Philip held Margaret's hand firmly. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we'll face it with honesty." She squeezed his fingers. "And with kindness," she added. Under the mango tree, the city fulfilled its promise. In a fast-paced world, one small act of kindness paused time, just long enough for love to catch up. Always choose to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Stand up for those who are vulnerable, even if it comes at a personal cost. Having power is meaningless without compassion. Just like being compassionate without honesty doesn't truly help anyone. Forgiveness can heal old wounds, and showing kindness consistently can change how a community remembers its past. What lesson did you take away from this? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this message resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still triumphs in Lagos.